Hello guys. I have a new original story today. I hope you will like it. The title is, I Inherited a Secret That Changed Everything. Let's go. My life before the letter was aggressively ordinary. I worked as a copywriter for a dental insurance company. Yes, the kind of job where you spend 40 hours a week finding creative ways to make root canal sound appealing. I lived in a studio apartment that smelled faintly of the Indian restaurant downstairs. My biggest decision most days was whether to reheat leftover pad thai or spring for fresh disappointment from the taco truck. I thought I knew my family story by heart. My grandfather, Vincent Caruso, had been a modest accountant in Newark. He'd raised my father in a cramped apartment above a butcher shop, sent him to state college on scholarships and grit, and died when I was 12. I remembered him as a quiet man who smelled of Old Spice and kept butterscotch candies in his pockets. Nothing about him suggested mystery. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. It came in a manila envelope, thick and official, forwarded through 3 addresses before finding me. The return address belonged to a law firm in Manhattan I'd never heard of, Holloway, Chun and Associates. My first thought was jury duty. My second thought was that I'd somehow been sued by the dental insurance industry for crimes against copywriting. Inside was a single sheet of cream-colored paper and a small iron key. Dear Ms. Caruso, as executor of the estate of Vincent Michael Caruso, I am writing to inform you of a bequest made in your name. Your grandfather established a trust prior to his death, with specific instructions that its contents be revealed to his eldest grandchild upon reaching the age of 30. The key enclosed will grant you access to Safety Deposit Box 847 at the First National Bank of Newark, 422 Broad Street. I strongly advise you to review the materials privately before discussing them with any family members. Please contact our office at your earliest convenience. Sincerely, Margaret Holloway, Yescu. I read it 3 times, each time more confused than the last. My grandfather had been dead for 18 years. I turned 32 months ago. Had this letter been sitting in legal limbo all that time, working its way through the postal system like some bureaucratic ghost? The phrase, strongly advise you to review the materials privately, lodged in my brain like a splinter. I called my father that evening, trying to sound casual. Hey, Dad, did Grandpa Vincent ever mention having a safety deposit box? Silence on the other end. Then, why are you asking? No reason. Just thinking about him lately. Your grandfather was a simple man, Emma. He didn't have secrets. The way he said it sounded more like a warning than a fact. I booked a train to Newark for Saturday. First National Bank of Newark looked like it had been designed to intimidate poor people. Marble columns, brass fixtures, ceiling fans that had witnessed the Great Depression. The safety deposit room smelled of old paper and older money. The attendant, a woman with spectacular fingernails and an expression of profound boredom, led me to box 847. She inserted her key, waited for me to insert mine, and left me alone in a small viewing room. My hands shook as I lifted the metal lid. Inside, a leather journal, yellowed with age. A stack of black and white photographs. A birth certificate, not mine, not my father's. And underneath everything, wrapped in cloth, stacks of $100 bills that looked vintage enough to belong in a museum. I started with the journal. My grandfather's handwriting, small and precise, filled every page. March 15th, 1963. I have decided to write this down because secrets have weight, and I'm tired of carrying it alone. If you're reading this, Emma, and I suspect you were always the curious one, then I'm dead, and you're old enough to understand what I couldn't tell your father. My real name isn't Vincent Caruso. It's Vincent Castellano. The room tilted slightly. I was born in Sicily in 1931, to a family that made its fortune in ways I'm not proud of. My father was what Americans would call a businessman and what honest people would call something far less kind. By the time I was 20, I'd seen enough violence to fill several lifetimes. I watched my uncle disappear over a debt. I saw my brother become a man I didn't recognize. In 1952, I made a choice. I stole $200,000 from my father's organization, money he'd collected from protection rackets and loan sharking, and I ran. I bought fake papers, changed my name, and became an accountant in New Jersey. I thought if I lived a clean, quiet life, I could balance the scales. The money in this box is what's left of what I stole. I never spent it. Blood money, Emma. It's built on suffering, shopkeepers who paid protection, desperate people who took out loans they couldn't repay. I couldn't spend it, but I couldn't return it either. Who would I give it to? The criminals I stole it from? I had to stop reading. My hands were shaking so hard the pages rustled. My grandfather, mild-mannered Vincent who'd helped me with fractions and took me for ice cream, had been a mob fugitive. The man who'd lectured my father about honest work had built his entire American life on stolen money. The photographs came next. Young men in expensive suits standing outside social clubs. My grandfather, younger, harder, unsmiling among them. One photo showed him with a man whose face I recognized from a documentary about organized crime. Another showed a wedding I'd never heard of, my grandfather as best man to a groom I didn't recognize. The birth certificate belonged to Vincent Castellano, born Palermo, Sicily, 1931. My grandfather's face, but a stranger's name. The last pages of the journal were dated months before his death. I'm dying, Emma. Cancer, the kind that doesn't negotiate. I've had 18 years with your father believing I'm a good man, and maybe I became one. Maybe that's possible. But this money, I need you to decide what to do with it. Your father couldn't handle this truth. He needs his memories of me intact. The current value, adjusted and with interest from safe investments the law firm managed, is approximately $3.2 million. I had to read that sentence 4 times. You can keep it, buy a house, start a business, live comfortably. Or you can try to make it right somehow, find descendants of the people it was taken from, donate it to causes that help victims of organized crime. I genuinely don't know which is the right answer anymore. What I do know is this. I loved your father. I loved you. I loved the life I built. But it was built on sand, Emma. And now you get to decide whether to build on that sand, or wash it away and start over. Choose wisely. Choose better than I did. Love always, your grandfather, whatever his name really was. I sat in that small room for 2 hours, staring at the stacks of money, the photographs, the birth certificate. The attendant knocked twice to ask if I was all right. I wasn't all right. I was holding my family's history in my hands, and it was nothing like the story I'd been told. I took everything. The journal, the photos, the money, all of it stuffed into my backpack like contraband, which I suppose it was. On the train back to the city, I kept expecting someone to stop me, to know what I was carrying. The first thing I did when I got home was count the money in the safety deposit box itself. $43,000 in vintage bills. Then I called the law firm. Margaret Holloway, senior partner, answered on the second ring. Ms. Caruso, I wondered when you'd call. You knew what was in the box. I knew enough. Your grandfather was my client for 30 years. A fascinating man. Did you know he was living under a false identity? A pause. I knew he had complicated reasons for privacy. The money in trust has been managed legally, if that's your concern. He paid taxes on the investments. Everything is above board from 1963 forward, at least. And before that, that's between you and your conscience, Ms. Caruso. The statute of limitations on his original acquisition expired decades ago. Legally, you're inheriting legitimate assets. Morally? She laughed, but it wasn't unkind. That's why he left the choice to you. The trust contained $3.2 million. The phrase kept bouncing around my skull like a pinball. I earned $42,000 a year writing about dental insurance. I had $17,000 in student loans. My car was held together by optimism and duct tape. I could pay off my debt, buy an apartment,
quit my job,
travel, never worry about money again. All I had to do was accept that my comfortable life would be funded by people who'd been extorted and exploited 60 years ago. I didn't tell anyone for 3 days. I went to work, wrote copy about periodontal coverage, ate lunch at my desk. But the journal sat in my apartment like a ticking bomb. On Thursday, I broke. I called my best friend, Rachel. We'd known each other since college, the kind of friendship where you can show up crying at midnight and the only question is wine or whiskey? I need to tell you something absolutely insane, I said when she answered. You're pregnant.
What? No.
Weirder. You're joining a cult, Rachel. Okay. Come over. I brought the journal. I brought the photos. I didn't bring the money, that felt too real, too dangerous. Rachel read the entire journal in silence, her eyes getting wider with each page. When she finished, she looked at me like I'd grown a second head. Your grandfather was in the Mafia? Apparently. And he left you blood money? $3.2 million of blood money, yes. Holy shit, Emma. This is. She started laughing, the kind of slightly hysterical laughter that means your brain is rebooting. This is the most Italian thing I've ever heard. Of course, your sweet little Nano who made pasta on Sundays was secretly a mob accountant. Of course. Despite everything, I laughed too. It's not funny. It's extremely funny. In a dark, existential, our lives are built on lies kind of way. She poured us both very large glasses of wine. So, what are you going to do? I have no idea. Let me ask you something. Rachel got serious, which meant she was about to say something important. If your grandfather had left you $3 million and told you he'd earned it as an accountant, would you question it? That's different. Is it? Most fortunes, if you go back far enough, have blood on them somewhere. Railroad barons, oil tycoons, real estate developers, somebody always gets exploited. At least your grandfather felt bad about it. So I should just keep it? I'm not saying that. I'm saying moral purity is expensive, and you need to decide if you can afford it. She refilled her wine. Also, you need to decide if you're going to tell your dad. That was the question that had been haunting me since Saturday. My father, gentle, anxious Robert Caruso, worshipped his father's memory. He'd named me after Vincent's mother. He still got misty-eyed talking about the man who'd worked 2 jobs to send him to college, who'd never missed a school play, who taught him that honest work was the only work worth doing. How could I tell him that story was a lie? That his father's honest work was a performance, a penance, a decades-long act of atonement? He'll be devastated, I said quietly.
Yeah.
He will. Rachel squeezed my hand. That's why your grandfather left this to you, and not him. He knew your dad couldn't handle it.
But you?
You're tougher than you think, Emma. I didn't feel tough. I felt like I was drowning in choices I wasn't qualified to make. I spent the next 2 weeks researching. Who had my grandfather's family victimized? Where had the money come from? Could I even trace it back to specific people after 60 years? The answer I discovered was I hired a private investigator named Morris Katz, a retired NYPD detective who specialized in cold cases. I told him I was researching family history. I didn't mention the money at first. Morris had the kind of face that suggested he'd seen everything and been disappointed by most of it. We met at a diner in Brooklyn, and I slid him the photographs. He studied them for maybe 30 seconds before whistling low. Where'd you get these? My grandfather's safety deposit box. Your grandfather knew these people?
He was one of them.
Briefly. In the 50s. Morris looked at me with new respect. And you want to know what they did? I want to know who they hurt. He flipped through the photos again, tapping one of my grandfather's standing outside a social club. This is Giuseppe Castellano's crew. Small-time operation, mostly protection rackets in Newark and Jersey City. Shop owners, restaurant owners, a few union guys. They weren't big enough to make headlines, but they made life hell for a lot of working people. Can you find out who they targeted? Maybe. After this much time?
Most of those people are dead.
But their kids might remember. Their grandkids might have stories. He paused. Why are you asking? I made a decision then. Because my grandfather stole money from them before he ran, and he left it to me, and I need to figure out if I can give it back. Morris stared at me for a long moment. Then he started laughing, the kind of deep, belly laugh that made other diners turn to look. What? Kid, I've been doing this work for 40 years. You know how many people I've met who inherited dirty money? Dozens. You know how many of them wanted to give it back? He held up a finger.
1. You.
Is that good or bad? It's rare. Whether it's smart. He shrugged. That's above my pay grade. But I'll help you. This is the most interesting thing I've worked on in years. Morris spent 6 weeks digging through old records, tracking down descendants, piecing together a network of victims from fragmentary evidence. He found the granddaughter of a restaurant owner who'd paid protection for 15 years. The son of a dry cleaner who'd been beaten when he couldn't pay. The niece of a longshoreman who'd been forced to give kickbacks from his union wages. A dozen other families with stories about the years when Giuseppe Castellano's crew made their lives smaller and more fearful. Morris compiled it all into a report that made me sick to read. Grocery stores closed because the protection payments were too high. Kids who didn't go to college because their parents' businesses never recovered. One man who'd had a heart attack after being threatened, dying at 47. My grandfather had been part of that. Not the muscle, maybe, but the accountant who'd tracked the payments, who'd known where every extorted dollar came from. And then he'd stolen from the thieves and pretended to be someone else. Here's what you need to understand, Morris said when he presented the report. Most of these families would never know you were Vincent Castellano's granddaughter, if you don't tell them. You could keep the money, and nobody would be the wiser. But if you're asking whether they deserve restitution,
Yeah.
they do. These people spent decades rebuilding what your grandfather's crew destroyed. Some of them never fully recovered. He leaned back. Question is, do you owe them your grandfather's money, or does he? Because he's dead, kid. You didn't do any of this. But I benefit from it. I'm the one with the choice. True enough. Morris smiled, and for the first time it seemed genuine. Your grandfather was right about you. You're something special, Emma Caruso.
I made my decision that night.
I decided to give it back, not all at once, and not in a way that would destroy my own life, but methodically and deliberately. I contacted Margaret Holloway and set up a foundation, the Vincent Caruso Restitution Fund. The name felt important, not hiding who he was, but owning it. Here's what I decided. I'd keep $400,000 for myself, enough to pay my debts, buy a small apartment, and have a cushion. Not generational wealth, but security. The remaining $2.8 million would be distributed over 10 years to the families Morris had identified and to organizations that helped victims of organized crime. Each family would receive a letter explaining who my grandfather was, what he'd done, and why I was doing this. The first letter was the hardest to write. It went to Maria Santos, the granddaughter of the restaurant owner. Dear Miss Santos, my name is Emma Caruso, and I'm writing to tell you about my grandfather, Vincent Castellano. In the 1950s, he worked as an accountant for an organized crime operation that extorted money from your grandfather's restaurant, among many other businesses. I learned about this only recently, through papers he left me. Before he died, my grandfather, who changed his name and lived the rest of his life trying to be a good man, left me money he'd stolen when he fled that life. He asked me to decide what to do with it. I can't undo what was done to your family. I can't give your grandfather back the years of fear and financial hardship. But I can offer restitution, not as payment, but as acknowledgement that a debt exists and was never settled. Enclosed is a check for $75,000. It's a fraction of what your grandfather likely paid in protection money over the years, adjusted for inflation. It comes with no strings attached and no expectations. You can accept it or refuse it. You can forgive my grandfather's memory or not. I only hope it helps in some small way. Sincerely, Emma Caruso. I sent 17 letters like that. 9 families accepted the money. 4 refused it. 1 with a polite note saying the past should stay buried. 3 with no response at all. 4 families wanted to meet me. The first meeting was with Maria Santos herself. She was 73, a retired teacher with grandchildren of her own. We met at a cafe in Newark, and I brought my grandfather's journal. She read it carefully, turning pages with the deliberate slowness of someone who knew how to savor words. When she finished, she looked at me with eyes that were tired but not unkind. My grandfather died when I was 8, she said. But my grandmother lived to 92, and she never forgot those years. She never forgot the men who came every week for their envelope. She never forgot what it felt like to be afraid in her own restaurant. I'm sorry, you didn't do it, but your grandfather did. She smiled slightly. Do you know what the strangest part is? I remember her talking about Vincent, the accountant. She said he was the polite one. The one who never threatened, who just wrote things down in his little book. She almost felt sorry for him. Did that make it better or worse?
Worse.
Because it meant he knew exactly what he was doing. He knew these were real people with real lives, and he took from them anyway. She pushed the journal back across the table. But then he spent 40 years trying to make up for it. Do you think that's enough? I don't know. Me neither. She looked at the check I'd given her. I'd mailed it with a letter, but she'd brought it to the meeting. This is more money than my grandmother's restaurant made in a year, even before the protection started. I'm going to use it to fund scholarships for immigrant kids. Kids whose parents are trying to build something like my grandfather was. That's beautiful. It's not forgiveness, but it's something. She stood to leave, then paused. Your grandfather couldn't make this right, Emma. Maybe nobody can. But you're trying, and that means something too. I cried in my car for 20 minutes after that meeting. The other meetings followed similar patterns: pain acknowledged, restitution accepted or refused, forgiveness withheld or carefully, cautiously offered. Each conversation felt like walking through a minefield of inherited guilt. But something strange started happening. The more people I talked to, the more I realized this wasn't just about the money. It was about acknowledgement. It was about someone finally saying, yes, that happened to you. Yes, it was wrong. Yes, it mattered. One woman told me her father had nightmares for years about the men who threatened him. The restitution check let her pay for therapy for his PTSD, 40 years too late, but still. Another family used their money to keep their family business open during COVID, the same business that had nearly closed in the 50s because of protection payments. The foundation gave grants to organizations helping victims of loan sharks, human trafficking, labor exploitation, all the ways organized crime still hurt people. My grandfather's blood money slowly transformed into something that might actually help. It wasn't redemption. It wasn't absolution. But it was something. My father found out 6 months after I started the foundation. I'd been dreading this conversation since the moment I opened the safety deposit box. I'd rehearsed it 100 times, tried to find words that would soften the blow, make it easier somehow. There were no such words. I invited him to my new apartment, small, modest, but mine. He arrived with flowers and that slightly worried expression he'd worn since I was a teenager testing boundaries. "I need to tell you something about Grandpa," I said. He set down the flowers carefully. "This is about that letter, isn't it? From the lawyer." "You knew." "I knew your grandfather had secrets. He told me once, when I was about your age, that if I ever got a letter after he died, I should burn it without reading it." He smiled sadly. "I told him I would. But I also told him that if he left anything to you, you'd never burn it. You're too curious." "Dad." "Just tell me, Emma. Whatever it is." So I told him. Everything. His father's real name, the stolen money, the families who'd been hurt, the foundation I'd started. I showed him the journal, the photographs, the letters from the people I'd contacted. He listened without interrupting, his face going through stages of grief I recognized from my own process. Denial, anger, sadness, something that might have been acceptance. When I finished, he sat in silence for a long time. I always wondered, he finally said, why he was so insistent about honesty. Why he'd lecture me about integrity, like he was trying to convince himself, not just me. He picked up one of the photographs. He was trying to be different than this person. Yes. Did he succeed? I don't know. Did he? My father thought about it. He was a good father. He was kind. He helped people, neighbors, people at church, anyone who needed it. He lived simply, never spent money on himself. He set down the photo. But he did those things because he was haunted by who he'd been. Does that make them count less? Does it? I'm asking you, Emma. You're the one who's been living with this for months. You're the one giving away millions of dollars to make it right. What do you think? I've been asking myself that question every day. I think people are complicated. I think he did terrible things and then he tried to do better, and neither cancels out the other. The people he hurt are still hurt. But the family he built, you, me, were still real too. And the money? I'm trying to turn blood money into something else. I don't know if it's working, but I have to try. My father pulled me into a hug then, and we both cried. For the grandfather we'd known, for the man we hadn't, for the complexity of loving someone who'd been both savior and accomplice. I'm proud of you, he whispered. Your grandfather would be too. I don't know if I want him to be proud. Maybe that's okay. Maybe that means you're doing it for the right reasons. The conversation with my father opened something in me. I'd been carrying the weight alone, trying to make perfect decisions about imperfect situations. But morality, I was learning, wasn't about perfection. It was about trying, failing, and trying differently next time. I started speaking publicly about the foundation, not seeking praise, but hoping to spark conversations about inherited wealth, restitution, and what we owe for the sins of previous generations. Some people thought I was noble. Others thought I was a fool giving away money that was legally mine. A few people accused me of performing virtue for attention. They were all probably a little bit right. The weirdest response came from a journalist who wanted to write a book about my story. It's the perfect narrative, she said enthusiastically. Guilt, redemption, justice, very marketable. I declined. Some things shouldn't be monetized, even if they make good stories. Here's what I learned over the 3 years since I inherited the secret that changed everything. First, moral clarity is a luxury. Real life is messy, and most decisions involve choosing between imperfect options. I could have kept the money and done nothing. That would have been legal, defensible, and selfish. I could have given away every cent and lived as a martyr. That would have been noble, impractical, and kind of performative. Instead, I chose something in between, keeping enough to change my own life while trying to address the harm my grandfather's actions caused. Some people will always think I kept too much. Others will think I gave away too much. I had to get comfortable with that. Second, you can't fix the past, but you can address it. The families my grandfather hurt will never get back the years of fear and hardship.
No amount of money changes that.
But acknowledgement matters. Being seen, being heard, having someone say this was wrong and you deserved better. That matters more than I expected. Third, people contain multitudes. My grandfather was a criminal who stole and enabled exploitation. He was also the man who taught me to read, who helped my father become a teacher, who volunteered at soup kitchens and never missed Sunday Mass. Both things are true. Holding both truths at once is exhausting, but it's the only honest way to remember him. Fourth, inherited wealth is inherited responsibility. This applies whether your money came from organized crime, from enslaved labor, from environmental destruction, from worker exploitation, or from any of the countless ways fortunes are built on others' suffering. If you benefit from it, you have to reckon with it. Fifth, small actions compound. I'm not deluded enough to think my foundation changed the world. But it changed specific worlds. It kept a business open, funded college educations, paid for therapy, supported organizations doing real work. Maybe that's enough. Maybe it has to be. The foundation is still running. Morris Katz became a board member, which he finds hilarious. From detective to do-gooder, he said. Your grandfather would appreciate the irony. I left my job at the dental insurance company. I'm not rich. My nest egg is comfortable but not luxurious, but I have the freedom to do work that matters to me. I started consulting with other people who'd inherited complicated wealth, helping them figure out how to address the moral weight of their money. Turns out there are more of us than you'd think. My father and I have gotten closer. We talk about his father now, really talk about both versions of the man. It's painful, but it's honest. My father told me recently that the hardest part wasn't learning his father had lied, but realizing he'd probably lied out of love, to protect his family from a truth they didn't need to carry. But you're carrying it, he said. And I'm sorry about that. Don't be. It's mine to carry now. And I'm strong enough. Rachel still thinks I'm slightly crazy. You could be on a beach somewhere, she reminds me regularly. I'm not a beach person. You could at least be on a nicer couch. She's not wrong. My apartment is still small, my life still ordinary in most ways. I shop at Target and take the subway and worry about my student loans, which, yes, I paid off because I'm flawed and human and that money was right there. But when I lie awake at night, I'm not haunted by my grandfather's ghost. I'm not paralyzed by guilt or drowning in moral confusion. I made a choice, imperfect, complicated, but mine. I tried to do something difficult and right, even when right was ambiguous. That has to count for something. They say money can't buy happiness, but in my experience, it can buy something more interesting, moral complexity. Before I opened that safety deposit box, my life was simple. Boring maybe, but simple. I knew who I was, Emma Caruso, underpaid copywriter, decent person, unremarkable in every way that mattered. I knew my family story, hardworking immigrants, honest people, nothing to hide. The secret my grandfather left me destroyed that simplicity. It replaced easy answers with impossible questions. It turned my grandfather from a saint into a flawed human being trying to outrun his past. It made me complicit in a history I hadn't lived but couldn't escape. Would I give it back? The knowledge, not the money? Would I choose ignorance over this complicated truth?
No.
Because here's what else the secret gave me. Agency.
Purpose.
The opportunity to make choices that mattered, to wrestle with questions that don't have clean answers. My grandfather handed me a moral crisis, but he also handed me the means to address it and the freedom to choose my own path. Most people never get that. Most people inherit either comfort or struggle, wealth or poverty, but rarely the choice between them. Rarely the knowledge of where their comfort came from or what it cost others. I got to choose. And I chose to try to do better. The foundation will outlast me. The families it's helped will tell their own stories. My grandfather's name, both of them, will be remembered not just for what he took, but for what his granddaughter tried to give back. That's not redemption. It's not absolution. It's something smaller and more human, an attempt, an acknowledgement, a step in a direction that might be right. And sometimes, in a world as complicated as ours, an attempt is the most honest thing we can offer. I still have the journal. I reread it sometimes, looking for clues I missed, trying to understand the man who wrote it. The last entry haunts me.
Choose wisely.
Choose better than I did. I like to think I'm trying, Grandpa. I like to think that counts. On my desk, I keep one of the butterscotch candies from the bag we found in his effects. It's wrapped in yellowed cellophane, probably stale, definitely inedible. I'll never eat it, but I keep it there as a reminder. People are more than their worst acts, but they're not less than them either. We're all trying to be better than we were. We're all carrying secrets that weigh more than we expected. The difference is what we do when the weight becomes ours to carry. I chose to carry it differently. I chose to try to transform it, to turn blood money into something that might heal instead of harm. I chose to sit with discomfort, to wrestle with complexity, to accept that doing something imperfectly is better than doing nothing at all. Will it be enough? Probably not. Nothing is ever enough when you're trying to address decades of harm with finite resources. But it's something. It's a start. It's a granddaughter saying to her grandfather's ghost, "I see what you did. I see what you tried to do. I see the gap between them. And I'm going to try to close it, one difficult choice at a time." The secret changed everything, just like the lawyer's letter promised. But I changed too. And maybe that's the real inheritance. Not the money, not the truth, but the person I became while deciding what to do with both. The Vincent Caruso Restitution Fund continues its work today. If you or someone you know has been affected by organized crime and needs support, resources are available at fictional organization names. If you're wrestling with complicated inherited wealth, know that you're not alone. The conversations are difficult, but they're worth having. Some secrets destroy us. Others force us to become someone stronger. Choose wisely. Emma Caruso.